Welcome back. Thanks for coming back again after your warm-up video. So this one I thought would be really good to follow up the end of that chair-based warm-up with the pillars, the two pillars of really good falls prevention methodology, I guess. And that's a really sound squat for your lower limb strength. And that's coupled with center of gravity, base of support relationship. So I thought we might cover those two concepts and techniques, which will give you a really good understanding of falls prevention. So we'll start with the squat technique. And most people, if you told them to squat, what they do is they go forward with their knees and you kind of get that action. That puts a lot of strain on the knee, which we don't need, so the knee ends up forward of the toes, and we don't need that at all. We want to keep that back. So what we do is what we call in the gym a hip hinge or a hip break, and it's the basis of all the exercises we do. So when you eventually get into doing deadlifts and squats of all kind, the hip hinge is really the basis. It's the crux of all the exercises we do in the gym. So you start here standing straight, and instead of sinking down to the knees, what we want to do is we want to get our hips back. We want to get back into the hips, hence the hip hinge or hip break. So there's a little bit of a pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt first, and then back into the hips. You want to take that back, like you're just pointing your backside back to where you want to sit down. In this instance, it's a chair. So from here, pelvic tilt, back into the hip. At this point, don't bend the knees. We'll just do 5 hip hinges, just that, no knee bend. So from here, pelvic tilt and hip hinge, and then straighten up. Very good. And back into the hip and straighten up. And 3 more. 2 more. And last one, hip hinge, no knee bend. That's it, and back, pelvic tilt back to neutral spine. So standing here, nice and straight, the lumbar spine is in neutral. And from here we're going pelvic tilt, back into the hip, that hip hinge, and now we're going to start to bend the knees, and we're going to do a partial squat. So we're not quite sitting down just yet. Back to that pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt, hip hinge, keep the knees back over the heels, keep the energy going down through the heel and back. So it's just that partial squat. So pelvic tilt, hip hinge or hip break, the knees haven't bent yet. Start to bend the knees, keep that backside going back towards the chair. Reverse that and pelvic tilt back to neutral spine. And 2 more. Pelvic tilt, hip hinge. Now start to bend the knees, straight through the knees and neutral spine, and 1 more time, pelvic tilt, hip hinge, knee bend, energy back onto the heels. You can lift your toes just to make sure that that's happening. Push through the heels and neutral spine, pelvic tilt. Very good. So this time we're going to do 5 sit down, stand up squats. So we're taking the squat all the way down to the chair and standing up again in the stages that we've learnt it. So from a neutral spine, we have a pelvic tilt. We then do our hip break or hinge, start to bend the knees, keep the energy down through the heels and keep going back into the hip till you hit the chair and then straight back up again. Neutral spine, pelvic tilt. So pelvic tilt, back into the hips. Start to bend the knees as you sink down towards the chair. As soon as you hit the chair, reverse that, push down through the heels and pelvic tilt to finish off. Pelvic tilt, hip hinge, knees back, sit down, stand up, pelvic tilt to finish. So this pelvic tilt is very good for lumbar spine mobility. Pelvic tilt, hip hinge, back into the hips, keep those knees back, and all the energy going up through the heels, and then back to neutral spine. 1 more time. Pelvic tilt, hip hinge, knees bend, chair and back up again. And that's your challenge, is to do 5 sit down stand up squats every day, and you'll be really surprised by how quickly that leg strength develops. And you'll be doing 8, 10, 15 in no time at all, if you do start with 5 every day. And the benefits are enormous. As I said, it's probably the most important pillar of good falls prevention, is having really strong lower limbs. And that's your go-to exercise, your sit down, stand up squat. The other element of good falls prevention is what we call the relationship between centre of gravity and base of support. So, centre of gravity, obviously if you draw a line straight through the body here, that's your centre of gravity. If you move, then your centre of gravity has now changed and the line would be in a different place. So every time you move from this central position, your centre of gravity shifts as well. Your base of support is basically, if you draw a line around the outside of your feet, that is your base of support. So at the minute, my base of support is really, really small. So were I to change my centre of gravity, say I'm in the garden, I'm weeding, and so I'm bending down, my base of support is really small. It means that I can't stretch very far for that weed before I fall and lose my balance. So what we need to do is, in order to increase or lessen the likelihood of falling, we need to increase the base of support. So if we step forward and slightly out to the side, the base of support now is much bigger. Yeah, you've created this much bigger base of support, and consequently, you can now reach much further and still be stable, still be strong. And this is the second pillar of the falls prevention, is the relationship between your base of support and your centre of gravity. So you can practice that we often do multi-directional lunges, is a really good way of practicing this. So you might increase your base of support by moving forward, always keeping it room here, not straight forward, and reaching like this, picking something up off the floor. You might increase your base of support by moving out laterally to the side. Again, you might have to pick something up. You might be cleaning a spot where you've dropped your red wine or whatever it is, and you can do it to the back as well, so you can do it behind. But it's that increasing your base of support first, and then you shift your centre of gravity, and then you should be much more stable, much more able to perform those activities of daily life, those activities that you do every day of your life, that sometimes you might have to hang on to things. If you develop your lower limb strength and you work on the relationship between your centre of gravity and your base of support, you should be able to do a lot of these activities, reaching, picking things up off the floor, weeding. Gardening's a really good example, actually. The other thing it will do is, if you're in public, which you won't be for very long, but you might be doing your 7 a.m. or 8 a.m. shop at Coles, and suddenly somebody brushes past you. It's that ability to react to that. So you'll get stimulus from externally, and you'll be able to react much better by being able to find that base of support, whether you need to move backwards as a skateboarding teenager comes past you, or whatever it might be, somebody from behind and then having to move forward. It's just a really good skill to develop, this increasing your base of support and then changing your centre of gravity. So they're the two things, they're the two pillars of really good falls prevention. Strength in the lower limbs, which we're going to get by doing at least 5 sit down, stand up squats, and looking after and developing the relationship between our centre of gravity and our base of support. Base of support first, then centre of gravity moves with it. Thank you for listening. That's the end of this video, and hopefully there'll be many more, and I'll see you again. Thanks for tuning in.